the September 30th, 2024 meeting of the Charter Revision Commission to order. Our first order of business is approval of the September 16th, 2024 meeting minutes. Would anyone like to make a motion?
I will make the motion to approve.
Are there any corrections,
Yes.
suggestions? No.
Page 2, line 4, staggered is misspelled. Well, speak up.
You're fat. We'll give you credit, Denise, for finding it.
Yes, it's Denise is correct.
Are there any other changes or corrections that we need to make? Oh, you have another one, Maya.
Yeah, line 42 on page 3, it should be O'Connor adjourned the meeting.
Joy, are you okay if you amend your motion to say approve the minutes as amended?
Yes.
Right. All those in favor of approving the minutes of the September 16th as amended, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed?
So that's
Passes.
5-0.
No, aye. Okay, now we're gonna go to old business, and the first thing up is the select board, and two things with the select board. Specifically, the rules of procedure and filling vacancies, and these are the things that we talked about at our last meeting. And we said we were talking about them again after we thought about them a little bit. And the first one is rules of procedure. And this came about because it was Ian Goodnow suggested that we put a reference into the charter. Because I think he was talking about being more specific about the role of the select board, and specifically the chair and all of that thing.
And what happens at the first meeting?
What happens at the first meeting, and the rules of procedure, and I emailed it to everybody, I'm really sorry I did it at the last second, but it's dawned on me.
Oh, this afternoon?
Yes, literally the last second. And
It's in the charter.
the whole rules of procedure? No.
Well, the section that he wanted to amend.
Oh, yeah, and it would just be adding, referencing the rules of procedure that the select board establishes for itself, which outlines how they're gonna conduct their business, who sets the agenda, that there's a chair and vice chair. So it's not anything, to me, it's nothing controversial.
Yeah,
put in.
Hannah has drafted language.
Yeah, she's got the,
And she added, at the first meeting after the election and qualification, the select board should elect a chair, a vice chair, and a clerk. Within 30 days after their election and qualification, the select board shall establish rules of procedure.
Peter.
Rita?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, the first of those two sentences exists, and she was proposing the second one be added because of
Yeah,
everything that Kate said. And I think that's right. I think we were all,
yeah. She
wanting to do
reviewed
this.
these with Bob Fisher.
okay. So I might annoy you, but I have proposed language change that doesn't have to do with legal. I wouldn't presume to second guess two lawyers, but just for clarity, because we want everybody to be able to read the charter and know how town government works. Within 30 days after the election and qualification would make it tight if there's a year when the select board, as it convenes and chooses its chair and so on, if there's a year when they're gonna work on there might be some changes in who's on the board, and we've seen this happen where sometimes it takes a few weeks to, 2 or 3 meetings to kind of work that out. for what the adjustment to the rules of procedure might be. And it's also been, I think, a healthy practice, it certainly has been the practice, that the rules of procedure are for that board that year. And then just as we're now memorializing, the next board looks at them and decides whether they're adopting the same ones or modifying. So I would like to suggest that that second sentence read this way. And actually, I should say, I'm going to also suggest that there be, that the 30 days be tied to that first meeting, because the board isn't a board until that night. So even though they've been elected 3 weeks earlier, they don't get seated, and this organizational meeting doesn't happen until after the town meeting has occurred. And so, at least under the current schedule, the current town meeting system. So my suggestion is that this sentence say, within 30 days after that meeting, comma, the select board shall establish its rules of procedure for that year.
Yeah, I don't have any trouble with that, but I feel we shouldn't make the change without Hannah being here.
I'm fine to
Yeah,
wait until another night or later this evening.
when she comes in, because I actually, yeah, and I actually, as being on the select board, I totally agree with you, Peter. Because, and we also have to remember, the select board meets twice a month, so it's not like they're meeting every week. So you're giving somebody the first meeting to look at it, and then they have to approve it at the second meeting.
Yeah.
And this year was a perfect example, because there's one new member, and they went, didn't they, it wasn't like, there were suggestions that people were making, Franz made suggestions, Richard Davis, so I agree with you.
This addresses the timing,
Yeah.
and it also, admit pickiness. I'm gonna continue to admit pickiness as we go along. Having it say, instead of establish rules of procedure, having it say establish its rules of procedure for that year
Yeah.
makes it really clear. This is the
Yeah.
select board doing a thing for the select board,
Yeah.
and it's for this year's select board.
Yeah. And I think that's what, Ian was bringing up, that there's nothing that says they have to have rules of procedure.
Right.
And this would make it so, at least, there's something that the public knows too, what the
Yes.
select board does.
Yep.
All right, so, what you're saying is, say, within 30 days after that meeting, the select board,
I would say after the first meeting.
at the first meeting after their election and qualification, the select board shall elect a chair, a vice chair, and a clerk. Within 30 days of that meeting, the select board shall establish its rules of procedure for that year. Does that make sense now, Maya, if you read the first
Yeah.
sentence with it?
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, and so then if Hannah comes in tonight, we'll go through that with her. I mean, do you folks, that sound good? Okay.
Rules of procedure.
Yeah. All right.
You didn't hear from Hannah, did you?
No, ma'am.
So, I can't even find my own memo.
And the next thing is filling of vacancies on the board.
Yeah, we talked about, when it should be an election and when it should be an appointment, and you remember.
I do remember, and we were sort of talking, at what point, what was the timing? And I can't remember.
Yeah, if somebody resigns after the first month,
Right.
should there be an election? Or should the select board appoint somebody for the remainder of the term? And what if it's a 3-year term? So the question was when,
Right.
I think Franz was saying they would like some guidance.
Because currently, the select board fills a vacancy no matter if it's 1 day after the election, 6 months after the election. And that was sort of the concern for the board. Like, and Ian, I thought was good, because he is saying it really shouldn't be the select board's authority to appoint somebody if they resign the next day of election. So, there's Patrick.
Just one thing, Mr. Fisher was pretty clear, I thought, on one additional point, which is that if you're talking about a situation where it's the first year of a 3-year term, that person appointed by the select board would only hold that position until such time as the next election.
Correct.
And then you would hold an election for that seat, and that person would finish out the remaining 2 years.
Right. Right. So the question for us is, do we want to be more specific and say if the resignation occurs this much after an election or this much time before the election? I don't know how we sort of figure that out, what we want to do.
I do want clarity, especially for a multi-year term. So that way everyone knows what they're getting into with that. I recall that some of what might have been at stake was the administration of the next election. And so trying to find some clarity on, how close to already an election, whether it be the one that just happened or the next one that's coming, in case it is like 30 days before, 60 days before the March, yes, they're gonna be, it's okay, appoint and fill, right? That's a pretty close turnaround for the administration of. So I think it's just what our consensus comes to for that time bound. I personally can probably, I don't have a super strong feeling except that I could be convinced that if it is within the 3 months of the March election, that yes, get a new election. And if it's within the 3 months before the March, just ride it to March. But yes, having clarity on a multi-year appointment that it's just to fill the remaining time. So that way we don't lose that staggered nature.
Right.
So you would say there should be an election if it's more than,
If it's within 3 months of the March, so March, April, May, hold a new election. If it's within 3 months on the other side, January or February, January, December, do not hold an election.
And for the 6 months in between, there's room for us to talk about what feels right, I guess. Yeah.
We have a hand raised from our virtual.
Oh, Millicent.
Hey, Millicent.
Millicent can help us.
Want to hear from Millicent?
Yes, we'd love to.
yes, we would.
Hi, that's funny. What is the, it's a question about what is the effort and cost for the town or the town clerk's office to have a special election? Like if you were to say, be leaning on the side of, oh, sorry, now you can see me, sorry. What's the effort, what's the cost to the town, the effort to the town clerk of having a special election? So for example, if you were to say, we kind of think we might be leaning towards saying that that the select board member, if they leave after a very short amount of time, we need to have a new election to have them. What is that? Does it take a long time to put that election together? Is it very difficult because it's an extra election? Like, what's the downside to just from a cost point of view, an effort point of view to the town of saying, just have a temporary person appointed for a short period of time and have a special election? Like, what's the cost of doing that?
That's a very good question, Millicent. And we haven't asked that to Hillary, so that is a consideration we need to ask Hillary.
Because I mean, just hearing, and I don't know as much as probably everybody else in the room knows about this, but I would just personally be leaning in the direction of having the select board members completely elected. And that's because that's the point of the select board, right? Is that they're elected. And and I haven't heard all the arguments, so I could be wrong, but that's just my leaning on it. But you would need to have a temporary person. At the very least, you would have to have somebody appointed until an election could take place.
Right.
So, like, what are the downsides of doing it that way?
And
Then you don't have to have this if 3 months, if 6 months, if blah, blah, blah. Just have a simple rule that's like, no, they have to always be elected, except an appointment would fill in for a reasonable amount of time that it takes to put together another election. But is that even like, is that too expensive? Or is there some other reason why that's a bad idea?
Mm-hmm.
I'd be happy to share what we heard last meeting from Ian. Was at least around December and January, there's so much budgeting happening that to wait for a person to come in would delay all the administrative work to be ready for the March meeting. So it's a decently compelling argument to say those months, the work is so thick and needs done that you get a person in place and there's already a meeting coming up anyway.
Right.
But you would be in favor of, except for maybe the 3 months before the March election, you would be in favor of having a special election if appointing somebody temporarily and then having an election.
I mean, I can't say I've heard everything, but that's just my kind of my leaning. I can't say I know enough to say I'm absolutely for that, but I feel that it's important that the select board's members are all elected and people will feel better about it if they are.
Yeah.
One thing I think we should make clear, the whole reason we're having this conversation is because of sort of general agreement with what you just said, Millicent. So right now, if it was just one vacancy, which is clearly the most normal kind of vacancy that occurs, is just one person, then there's no provision for a special election whatsoever. It's always an appointment of the select board. If there's two vacancies at the same time, then there's a special election, unless you're so close. I think there is a provision about being close, but maybe not even that, actually, to the next election. And so the suggestion we received, and we liked it, and now we're just kind of wrestling with how to calibrate it, is to incorporate a provision that says, sort of for as much time of the year as it's practical, have it be an election, not an appointment. But understanding that that's not the whole year.
Right. I understand the budget season issue. It's intrusive. Like I get, or disruptive or whatever. I get that. Okay. Yeah. Be interesting to hear from Hillary about the cost of a special election.
Yeah.
So we should.
Thank you, Melissa.
Oh, thank you, Millicent. If you want to say more, just keep raising your hand.
So, we should talk to Hillary.
Yeah.
But it looks like, from what I heard, that we were saying, if it's more than 3 months before the next election, there should be a special election. Because that takes care of that
Yep.
6 month,
Totally. So I agree that we should phrase it that way. We should talk about how far we are from the next election. And I agree with everything you said, Joy, about the 3 months and the 3 months on either side. As far as calibrating in the middle, there's more to the budget process than just the part where it's coming out from the select board out into the world. in those last 3 months. And because it really goes on beginning in October each year and then through the holidays and then comes out into the public, I don't have a strong feeling about 6 or 9, but I think we should choose either 6 months prior to the next election or 9 months prior to the next election as the threshold for when it becomes an appointment instead of an election. So that the town can move quickly once we're 6 months in, which is September.
But you like the 6 or 9, not the 3.
Yes,
Just
so
in
what I'm
that-
suggesting
yeah.
is, we should definitely be, those first 3 months, there should be an election. And then as we get deeper into the year, there's a question there for us to land on. And my personal perspective on that is 6 months is the latest. I could live with 9 if y'all wanted to do that. 6 months, so if somebody resigned in early September, that would be 6 months ahead. Actually, let me pick a more clear time. If they resigned in late August,
Yeah.
they'd be coming up on 6 months to the next election, but not quite there, so there would be an election. But if they're resigned in the latter part of September, then there would be an appointment instead of an election. And the benefit of that is that the select board's plate is fuller in the fall than any other time of the year usually, except for, stuff that's going on, unusual circumstances. But in terms of the annual cycle, the fall is the busiest time.
So you're gonna, we should split the year 6 months and 6 months.
I think that would be
Right.
a good way to address the balancing act here
The
of,
first 6 months since the last election.
yes. If we're within 6 months of the next regularly scheduled election, it's an appointment. If we're not yet within 6 months of the next regularly scheduled election, then it's an election. And that's just my feeling. It's clearly a gut call on this. We just need
Yeah,
to decide what feels fair,
Okay, so
proper.
No, I agree with you.
can I just because I feel like we're doing math, so I need to figure out what the thing is. So because the year is actually March to March that we're talking
Yes.
about.
That's correct.
So between, the election's March 5th, let's
Yep.
just say that.
Yep.
The election's on March 5th. If we have a vacancy between March 5th and March, April, May, June, July, August, September,
Yes.
September, Labor Day.
Labor Day, so
Yes.
March 5th to September 5th. Just making those dates
In this
up.
hypothetical year.
Yeah.
Yes.
We do a special election.
Yes.
Yes.
And anything like or September 6th to March 5th,
Absolutely.
no special.
That would be an
Just
appointment
an
instead.
appointment.
Yes.
Okay.
And the only picky but I think important clarification on that is even in us using a hypothetical year like that, it wouldn't play off of the last March 5th. It would play off of the next,
That's right,
like
what's
March
coming
6th or
up.
4th.
Right, what's coming up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm gonna repeat this. If it happens we're picking these fabricated dates, March 5th and September 5th, there's an election, special election. September 5th to the next March year, no special election appointment.
Correct.
Yes,
Is that making sense?
that makes sense.
Yeah, and I'd still like to hear Hillary's input.
Yeah. We'll ask Hillary. I can get an answer from Hillary so we can talk about it at the beginning of the October 10th meeting,
That'd be great.
And then maybe we can vote on it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. I think that's good. I'll make sure I ask Hillary. I mean, the thing is that she'd have to do a special election anyway if there were 2 people. So it's kind of like, to sit there and say, well, we won't do one for 1 person, but we'll do one for 2 people. You know what I mean? It's sort of splitting.
And one thing that, based on how it's currently worded, we could decide to change this, but based on how it's currently worded, we don't need to address the question of whether it's just the remainder of this year or whether it's for the remainder of the term. Because the current language actually is clear on that, which I thought I didn't remember that, and I was grateful to see it in preparation for tonight, that if it's coming out, and this makes really good sense to me too, that it would be this way, if the voters have decided, if it's coming out of a special election, then it's the remainder of the term. So if it was a 3-year term that a person was leaving, then from a special election, they would serve for the remainder of those 3 years.
Mhm.
Yeah.
But in the same scenario of a 3-year term, if it was an appointment, they would only serve until the next March. And then there'd be an election for the remaining either 1 or 2 years of that term.
Can you say that one more time?
Is that C? Is that C?
That's in C.
Okay.
Yep, exactly.
Okay. I'm really sorry, I'm so tired.
So- Can I read a sentence and then
Yeah,
say what I think it clearly means?
yeah.
So in C of 4.4 vacancies, when a vacancy occurs on the board, the remaining select board shall fill the vacancy by appointment until the next regularly scheduled election.
Right.
So again, just using, it doesn't matter if it's a 1-year term,
Right.
because then it's gonna be up the next March
Right.
anyway. So let's just keep talking about 3-year terms.
Yeah.
Somebody's 6 months into a 3-year term.
Yeah.
And they go off the board, then there's a select board appointment, but only until the next regularly scheduled election.
Yeah.
Next sentence says, if there is more than one vacancy, the board shall call a special election to fill the vacancies for the remainder of the terms. So in that
I see what
case,
you're saying.
the election is to actually put somebody in the seat for the remainder of the whole 3
Yeah,
years.
Yeah, I totally see.
And so it feels to me like it's actually gonna be a pretty easy tweak here once we decide what we wanna do to the time frame.
Right,
Yeah.
Because we'll need to add some language about the time frame, but we won't need to change the,
staggered.
The staggered
for how long will the person serve, we won't need to address that.
Yeah, that would likely be the section to add the any time bound
Yes,
additional.
I totally agree with that, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
I get it now. Any election, we're filling the entire vacancy because it's an election
Correct.
by the people.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, so my duty before October's 10th will be to talk to Hillary and figure out, like, we're telling her this is what we want to do. Is it gonna drive her crazy? Or, I mean, she
When
any
was the
downsides
last,
to it?
when was the last time anybody resigned from the select board?
Oh,
I think that was when.
We had a vacancy, Peter, when you were here.
Donna Mac, well, I don't think so.
You sure?
no, we don't.
Right before I arrived, right? Or am I forgetting something?
No,
I thought that Donna Macomber came on after
Ken-
someone
I
had,
think it was
she
Ken
was
Schneck.
appointed.
Didn't Ken Schneck resign?
Yes,
because
and that
he
was the
moved
year
to-
before I came.
Oh, okay. So it was
Yeah.
the year before you came.
Yeah.
It was still your fault though, right?
It wasn't, yeah, and I'm sorry still about it. But actually, I'm not because Donna was wonderful to work with.
Yeah.
But I never knew Ken.
And Ken did not like us. He was moving to another state.
Right.
So,
Right,
Um,
but there's different reasons
Yeah.
why it happens.
Absolutely.
But I'm
And
just
it
saying.
doesn't happen very
happen-
often.
Yeah,
That's the other thing.
that was my point. It
Right.
doesn't happen often.
sometimes it's dramatic.
So that would have been
It's
like
dramatic.
2013 or 2014 was the last time.
Yeah. Patrick.
Yes. So I'm not 100% sure that our town clerk will be able to make the meeting in October. I've been asking her about it for a little while. And I can't remember her answer other than I'll try, but I'm not sure, something to that effect.
Yeah.
In response to Millicent's question, I think that's important information because I know that a special election will necessarily cost several $1,000s. And I would be less concerned truthfully about the select board's work than the town clerk's workload over the course of a year, which is very difficult to predict.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
special elections are time consuming and take a couple of months.
Yeah.
So, I think hearing from her would be important.
Yeah, I do too.
That's why Kate's gonna talk to her.
I figure if I can get an answer from her, if she can't be at the meeting, do you know what I mean? Maybe we get her.
Well, just before the big election, I mean, the early voting is going on.
Oh, I know. But if we can figure out if she can't be here, which I don't blame her if she can't, maybe she can like say, yeah, I don't think, or just give us the facts of
Yeah.
what timing screws her up. You know what I mean?
And how much it costs.
Yeah.
So we should definitely do this. The path we're on, it's the right path. We should hear from Hillary. It's interesting what you just said, Maya. We can anticipate what she's going to say about a presidential election
Oh, yeah.
year. So that, and we can't write a charter that says, except every 4 years when it's, you know. So we're gonna have to really think it through once we've heard from her, because if it was somebody who resigned in, let's say, August 25th this year, there need to be a special election held within 60 days.
Yeah.
By the time 60 days happens, October 25th,
Yeah,
she's up to her eyeballs in preparing for a presidential election with a heavy turnout, and there's already early voting going on, and it's a really fair point.
yeah.
But it might push us back to the 9 months instead of the 6, or we might leave the thing alone. I think it's important to hear from her.
And part of me, and I'm an election worker, so I totally get it, but there's part of me that says, you know, we have to do what's right for Brattleboro regardless of what's happening on a national level. Do you know what I mean? There's something for me, for us to make a decision because the presidential election's happening. But at the same time, as somebody who watches the town clerk's office have what they go through to put on an election,
Yes.
I'm very sympathetic to that. You know what I mean? So I kind of see it both ways, and
Right.
you know, I don't want us to stop everything that is important to us and have the, you know what I mean? I'm sort of,
Yep. So you'll talk to her, and then we'll talk some more.
yeah, I'll get her.
We'll wrestle with it.
Yeah.
Good.
So Hannah, thing of,
Now, the authority to raise revenue is
Yes.
next, and we had talked about this, because we do want to give the town, or have a provision in the charter so that we can raise revenue. And
this language, was put together by, I believe, Patrick and Bob Fisher and Hannah.
So, essentially what we were, capitalizing was on the last discussion of the Charter Revision Commission. And, you know, you sort of empowered us in a way to, put our heads together and take a look at the language that was coming out of Rutland and, Burlington, and to see if there was a way to consolidate it and to, you know, basically take as light as hand as possible. So in looking through the existing charter and seeing the provision letter U, which is in the general powers duties of the select board, it just seemed the most artful way to accomplish what we were seeking to do would be to just add the language which says, and taxation for revenue purposes, to an existing list of responsibilities and authority that the select board has that all but mimicked everything that Rutland was doing. So this seemed to be the way to get to that with the fewest number of words possible.
So it just adds, and to provide for the regulation, licensing, and taxation for the collection of revenue of such activities as what's already written there.
Yep, that is correct.
That makes sense to me.
Peter, oh,
Are we gonna vote on these as they come along, or are we just gonna give them a nod?
that's what we were
No,
talking about.
I think we should vote
Vote on
on
them.
I'd like to move approval of this as proposed. I think it does everything that you just said, that it's the most efficient and artful way of doing this really important thing and having it, it will accomplish what we were hoping for, and it will accomplish it in a way that is, if necessary, we can make the argument to the legislature, we're just doing what you already allowed Rutland to do.
Right, and it's 7 words.
Exactly, exactly.
Okay, so Peter has moved that we adopt the language as presented to us.
Yes.
I'll second.
Maya seconds. Is there any more discussion on doing this? Does anyone have any more comments or questions? All right, so let's vote. All those in favor of adopting the authority to raise, I'll say, raise revenue language as presented to us, please say aye. Aye. Anyone opposed? No. So passes 5-0.
Oh, we have
We have a
vote.
recommendation.
This is exciting.
Perfect.
Do you want me to talk about the ethics stuff?
Well, Patrick wants to give us the
Yeah, I
update.
will, but I'll give it back.
Oh, yeah, okay, yeah, next up is, we talked about, or Bob Ogier had brought this to our attention, whether we need an ethics code or some kind of conflict of interest policy for committees, boards, commissions. There is something in the charter right now, but Bob Ogier's issue was, does it
Conform to this, to the
yes,
state.
statute?
Quick aside, do you know where in the charter it currently?
Yeah, it's Article 2, Section 9.
Which is on page, I think it's 4, wait, come up here. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's page 4, section 9, conflict of interest.
Okay, thank you.
So, Patrick, you want to say what you discovered? I sent a copy of what, according to the state, was the most recent ethics code, the statute.
But
And
Patrick,
since then,
big news, hot off the press.
it's been revised by the state, so,
And this is what we have in front of us, this big long
and
thing.
that's the big thing.
So, in all fairness, this is what you provided here, 24 VSA Section 1984. That is still in fact legitimate. However, I added a nice thick document to your board packet on your table there. By virtue of Act 171, the Vermont legislature is repealing 1984. It is currently still the law of the land, but on June 30th of 2025, it will cease and be replaced by what will be Section 1991 of Title 24. And this is a municipal code of ethics that is 30-page long and here for your consideration. It also, in its second to last page, makes it quite clear that it trumps any provision in any existing charter. So this is the law of the land as it relates to municipal ethics going forward. And so given its size, Bob Fisher and I were talking about it earlier today, and we thought perhaps the most sensible thing might be to just strike the provision in the charter that speaks to the conflict of interest, because the legislature has now established a more comprehensive and complete municipal ethics code.
So Bob is suggesting that we just refer to this in the charter.
No, well, what he was suggesting is you might just strike the current reference to the conflict of interest, because this exists, and therefore doesn't need to be in the charter, because it exists as
But
statute.
how if I got appointed to a board,
Yep.
how would I know what it was?
How would you know what it was? I think that would be ultimately staff's responsibility to see to it that, among other things, you will need ethics training.
Yes.
So I think that's going to be the trigger.
And it gets to the philosophical thing we did discuss last time, and I want to say again, because I feel really strongly about this one. This is the thing about, baby bear, mama bear, papa bear, scale charters. There are charters. I mean, Burlington's is the best example. They go on for pages and pages and pages and pages and pages, sometimes speaking to things themselves and sometimes speaking to how, you should refer to the state statutes on this question. But the fact is, you refer to the state statutes on any question that isn't addressed in the charter. And so we could be too skimpy. I'm very confident we're not going to be too skimpy, because we've got a good solid charter now and we're tweaking it. We're not throwing it out. But I think we together need to guard against getting too thick with references to state
I
statutes.
wasn't suggesting that we include all of this.
I understand.
But I was suggesting that someplace in the charter, we have a reference to it so that it's made clear to people that there is a municipal code of ethics and that Brattleboro does adhere to it. I mean, I think that's important.
Right, and I do,
I mean, it would just be a sentence saying that Brattleboro adopts or adheres to the, what is it?
You know.
Section
Yeah.
2224 VSA, chapter 60.
And I would just say then that potentially puts us on a path to have to reference everything if we want to
right,
stay
that's the
consistent.
thing.
If we stay consistent, and if, maybe the choice is not to stay consistent. However, we are currently reading something that is not consistent, and it is a little frustrating years later.
Yeah.
So I'm still currently deciding. I think it is, it's a lot to put on staff to keep folks in line, and I would have to check over it, because like, does that mean all boards? You know, like the Park and Recs board has to go through an ethics training.
Yeah.
I mean that, but everyone's gonna be doing this once it's law in 2025. So everyone in Vermont.
And I do think it is what Peter says, like, it's a philosophical discussion or decision we have to make, is every time something is referenced in state statute, do we put it like a line in our charter that says, oh, this is, follow state statute, or we're gonna do that, Joyce said, we gotta, do we wanna be consistent, which means we'd have to do that 20 times. Do you know what I
No,
mean?
that's,
Actually doesn't.
yeah, I'm not, I just feel very uncomfortable with a charter that does not refer at all to any kind of ethics code.
It's possible because it's new, but everyone's going to have to adhere to this being state law. And so everyone in Vermont is going to struggle with this, figure out what it looks like in their context, in their town, their village, but, we will have to, I have not read this, so there's a lot of pages to know how it might be embodied here in Brattleboro.
Well, I know, having served on the Development Review Board for almost 10 years, that we have a provision for conflict of interest that the chair has to check with each member of the board is asked if there are any conflicts of interest and what that means. But I don't know whether any other board does that.
But they're going to have to, that's the point about how this is gonna apply so broadly now. And it's so much more detailed also. The state used to have a simple thing that said, you have to have something that addresses these points, and you could have your own thing. Now they're saying this is preempting all those individual things. It's gonna be the state's rules, and it's 17 pages long. There's an additional risk. I think we should wait a month before we make this decision, because we've just received this tonight. We should take a look at it. We should come back and have a conversation when we've had a chance to each think about it.
Yeah.
But there's an additional consideration when we do come back, that it isn't just about the bulkiness of the charter versus the simplicity. It isn't just about consistency. It's also about, and I want to acknowledge when I say this, that the point you've made, Maya, is maybe code of ethics is so important we ought to make an exception. Maybe we do go for a streamlined charter, but still do this one that way where we reference state statute. And the one additional risk with that I'd just like us all to think about is wherever we might do that in here, the state statute is, when the state statute changes, our reference to whatever it was may become, not always will become, because it might be replaced by something that is just like changing a couple of words, but when it's an overhaul like this, our reference to the state's rule that we're following will now actually not refer to anything accurate. Somebody will see that we're complying with something, they'll go to look for the rule, and it won't exist anymore. That happens fairly often with ordinances. We should try to avoid it as best we can with
Yeah,
Sure.
maybe the answer is that just have some minimal language that Brattleboro does adhere to the municipal code of ethics. I mean, just give the title, something like that.
All right, so I think what we've kind of all, maybe we need to just read this thing
Yeah.
for the next
Yeah.
meeting and see what we, what we're thinking.
Bob Ogier on Zoom?
No.
Yeah, he wasn't sure whether he, well, I will talk to Bob also.
Because
Since-
this would supersede what he was trying
Right,
to bring in
anyway.
Oh, yeah,
in our
yeah,
own
yeah.
charter,
Yeah.
so, okay.
So I need to let him know that.
Yeah. Okay, so we'll put this on, maybe next, we're gonna have, when I originally talked to Bob Fisher, he was gonna be able to get on at 7 on the 10th. But I need to confirm because he's moving, or something's going on that day. So we'll have some time either way before we start talking the RTM thing, that maybe we can tick off, stuff like this. So I'll get the answer from Hillary, we can talk about that, and then we'll have another conversation about what to do with the ethics.
Vacancies and ethics,
Yeah.
level business.
Yeah, we can do all that. Okay, so the next thing is the recall issue. And as I recall, what came up was, do we want to have recall for cause? Like right now, it's just, where is it in the charter?
It is, at the bottom, starts in the bottom of page 5,
Oh, yeah, it is.
section 5.
Yeah, and it doesn't have anything that says you have to say why you want them recalled. It just said that there can be a recall. And I can't remember, somebody from the public, I think, brought this up, whether it should be for cause.
I think it was Tom
Yeah, maybe it's Tom.
Mozakowski.
Yeah, I mean, personally, this is, I don't see, if you put for cause in there, it's just, to me, it opens a can of worms, like, what does that mean? That's sort of where I'm coming from. Does it make it more complicated?
And who holds the hearing?
Right.
I mean, if it was only allowed for cause, you'd have to have some sort of a proceeding where it was determined whether there was cause or wasn't cause, which would take it out of the hands of the voters and put it in the hands of somebody who's gonna hold the hearing, or some group of people that would hold the hearing. Feels to me like, as a matter of our democratic system, that recall is explicitly the opportunity for voters to, under extreme circumstances, because there's a high threshold of the petition, percentage of voters that have to sign it in order to call a recall election, and then the idea of removing the person has to prevail at the recall election. So it's a pretty high bar to get over, but it's in the hands of the voters, which it feels like is exactly where it belongs.
I recall, there was, I know, wrong word. If I'm remembering correctly, because there was just a lot of talks about the different threshold levels, was this at stake with the threshold level as well? Because
I believe so.
right, like it's kind of inconsistent thresholds for anything, for an ordinance, for a petition, any non-binding, anything. I'm not necessarily advocating for a lower threshold, but I do think 25% or potentially even 10% is a significant enough that equals cause. And I don't need that language personally. If there's an argument for it, I'm willing to hear it, but I think it is baked in with a threshold.
Well, reconsideration of an ordinance is 20%. If you look at
Sure.
section 3.
But they're all different levels.
Yeah, that's what
Like
I'm
one's
saying.
5, one's 10, I think, one's, they're all different values.
But I'm just saying that reconsideration of an ordinance seems to be, to me, seems to be on the same level as recalling some elected official. So maybe we should make those two consistent.
What would 10% be? Would be 1,200? 1,000?
I'm sorry, what's the question?
It's the number,
about
it's
900, I think.
registered
I
voters.
think there's about 9,000 registered voters.
Yeah.
10%
Could
of
one person
registered,
ask
10% of registered voters of Brattleboro.
What's the percentage you're looking for?
10,
10?
roughly, obviously, but
I believe, as of today, that's 452, but there are a lot of people signing up to vote, so that number sort of floats.
I think that's 5%, 452.
Is it?
Yep.
Okay,
I think there's about 9,000 registered voters.
okay.
Am I, is that
No, that's probably
right
right.
or not?
That's probably right.
So that's 900.
Because we did 452, yeah, no, you're absolutely correct, actually, that is 5%, because we were thinking about, these provisions actually come into play around the office quite often. And there was an ordinance, I think there are some folks who were contemplating challenging that ordinance. And so they were asking about the petitions, and we were trying to figure out, okay, well, if they went this route and they wanted to reconsider, that would be 20, so it would be 452 times 4. So yeah, it's 5%.
Okay.
So are we talking changing, like, I think we're all on the same page maybe on for cause, but now are we talking about, if we move to talking about the percentage of signatures
Yeah.
required? That's what,
And I'd like to introduce just another, a separate thought because of the relationship between it and the percentage. I think it might affect our percentage decision. If there are, if it's our consensus that we should go to 20 for the consistency with that provision about reconsideration, I have no objection to lowering this threshold down to 20 from 25. I personally didn't enter the room thinking we needed to do that. And what I did want to suggest tonight, though, is because that's a high threshold, as it should be a high threshold for an action of this
20.
significance, I think that having it tied to 15 calendar days is too tight. I think that's not in our collective best interest. If there's a situation going on that people are concerned enough about that they're circulating a petition to maybe have a recall, it feels to me like there ought to be more than 15 days to do that. Now, I went back to our table that we had created when we were doing the other charters research and looked at those communities. I believe it's 16 of them, if I remember correctly. But anyway, there are a dozen or more communities across the state, all of them towns, no cities and no villages, but a bunch of towns do have provisions for recall. The percentage threshold ranges from 15% of registered voters to 35% of registered voters. So right now we're smack in the center of that at 25, just FYI. The time limit, there's actually some that have no time limit at all. It's just, you circulate the petition until you get to a place where you have enough signatures. That doesn't feel right to me either. And it feels to me like there could be people who might have signed it in June who by October are feeling like they wouldn't want to sign it anymore or whatever.
Yeah.
So I don't think that's good. But 15 feels too tight to me. And there are ones without a threshold, ones with 15 days and ones with 30 days. And there's some really good language from Hardwick and Springfield who have 30 days that I think we should mimic, where they refer to it being based on each signature, so that petition form would have to have a date in addition to the signature name and address. You got a date to fill in for each person who signs it.
Oh,
And when it gets handed in, you can't have, basically when they count up the signatures, just like if somebody's not a registered voter, they don't count. If somebody has signed more than 30 days prior, they don't count towards whether or not you've hit the threshold. And that feels right to me. That feels like a smart system to have.
Yeah.
So there's language we can just grab and pop in if we agree that's what we want to do.
Yeah, how do people feel about changing the 25 to 20?
I'm
If there are
fine.
9,000, what,
I
if
said I'm
there are
fine with that.
9,000 voters, 20% is
1,800.
1,800. That's a lot of signatures.
It's a lot.
I guess has the ordinance threshold at 20 ever been met?
Not that I'm aware of.
Not that I'm aware of either. But that doesn't mean it hasn't happened.
It doesn't mean it hasn't happened, but generally speaking, ordinances aren't all that,
No.
exciting.
Yeah, no one's
Um,
going for overturning.
So,
Yeah, and it's, to me, I mean, I'm fine with going to 20. You want to make it, I mean, it's a big deal to recall somebody.
Yeah.
So it needs to be high enough so there's not just every day someone's going, hey, I don't like that person, I'm gonna go out and get 10
Yeah.
signatures, we're having a special
Absolutely.
election.
So
And-
1,800 seems reasonable to me.
Yeah, and if it's the person that you're trying to recall has done something that horrible to get recalled, you're gonna be able to get 1,800 signatures because the whole town's gonna be going crazy.
Yeah.
At least that's what I think.
And I agree that 15 calendar days is short.
Now, on that one, Peter, should we look at the Hardwick and Springfield language?
I can read it to you if you'd like.
Oh, yeah.
And I should note that if you went and looked at it, there's a tiny tweak. I don't remember what the tiny tweak is, but I had one of my moments of looking at something and saying, well, that wasn't artfully phrased. It'll be clearer if you just use these two words instead of those two words. So what I would suggest, which is 100% true to the spirit of Hardwick and Springfield, and 95 or more percent exactly verbatim, the date of signing by each voter shall be indicated on the petition, and each signature shall be valid for a period of 30 days. Feels to me like that is just crystal clear.
Right.
So, you can end up, maybe it takes 2 months to do this piece of work, but anybody who signed in the first month doesn't count.
Okay. So, how does everybody feel about that? Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
I guess I'm, in the thought of consistency, I'm, just to say the words out loud, not for any action, that we look back at some of the other ones
Mhm.
and consider if it makes sense in those places as well. It might not.
Yeah.
But if
Yeah.
it does, it is nice language,
Yeah.
I think. And again, based on, what each item is, maybe it doesn't make sense to have a time count, but for this, yes.
Okay. So I think, just like to recap, we're putting for cause, not doing anything with that. And I don't know if tonight, do we want to vote on the 20% threshold, or do we want to wait until we look through everything, as Joy is suggesting, on the timing? And seeing if we want to use Peter's language at other places?
Peter, can you write out the language and send it
Yeah,
to
that's what I
us?
was gonna suggest.
For the
Let's not
next
vote
meeting.
tonight.
Yeah.
I'm not volunteering to do the double checking about all the other places where it's mentioned. But I would volunteer, and I think you're exactly right, Maya. I think we should see it, and we should all have it in front of us when we say, yeah, that's what we want. So I'd be happy to be the one who would take 3.5 recall and modify it as we've discussed tonight by lowering the percentage to 20 and putting in the sentence that I read, and having it be strike out and underlined so that it'll be plain
Yeah.
to see.
Thank you.
Sure.
That's perfect.
Okay.
And then we can talk about that hopefully on October 10th.
Yeah.
And we're on a whole bunch of stuff for October 10th. It'll be a
We're gonna knock it out.
we're gonna get this going here. Okay. Okay, so we'll do that for now, and then,
That's it.
yeah, we can take care of that.
We have nothing else.
God, we're really done with October 10th and 17th, yeah. I'll remind everybody who's watching, Millicent.
And David.
Oh, David Levenbach, we'll remind you guys.
Millicent and David.
We're gonna remind you, October 10th, we'll be here at 6:15, talking about representative town meeting, and as well as some of these other things we just talked about. And then October 17th, we're also gonna have a discussion on representative town meeting. So is there any other business that anyone would like to bring up this evening? Would someone like to make a motion to adjourn?
I will.
All those in favor of Maya's motion to adjourn, please say aye.
Aye.
Motion passes 5-0.